Welcome to the feature series, How Roger Penske Changed the Indy 500 on the Marshall Pruitt Podcast, which celebrates the most successful entrant at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on the 50th anniversary of his first event in 1969. Presented by Cooper Tires, the Justice Brothers, and Bell Racing Helmets, a long-standing partner of Team Penske. This 15-part series spans some of the greatest drivers, managers, mechanics, engineers, and the man himself, Roger Penske, to document the captain's vast influence on America's defining motor race, the Indy 500, and in many instances, the sport as a whole. We'll also be joined by a reporter who covered Penske's Indy debut a half-century ago and some of his fiercest rivals, many of whom admit to being fans of the 82-year-old icon. On the final episode of How Roger Penske Changed the Indy 500, our guests are three of the captain's rivals, starting with Rahal Letterman Lanigan co-owner Bobby Rahal, continuing with McLaren Racing CEO Zac Brown, and closing with Chip Ganassi Racing Managing Director Mike Hull. Mr. Rahal, you and Roger Penske have a very interesting and intertwined relationship throughout the years, knowing that we are at this 50th anniversary of his participation and trying to bring some context to his contributions to the sport, especially to the 500. There's an interesting relationship the two of you have had for quite some time. You're both team owners and have been, but he's a former driver. I heard you did fairly well at a driving career. Where should we start, just in your thoughts of this relationship and just seeing what Roger has done for this sport, especially at the 500?
Well, of course, I didn't know Roger personally until much later, but obviously saw Roger drive as a driver, race as a driver, where he was very competitive, very successful. And then really saw him admired his teams from afar for the professionalism that, Roger was really the guy that really brought, I think, professionalism to racing, of all types of racing, not just IndyCar and sports cars. And, everybody used to remark how his pants were neatly creased and
Sure.
he wore, Gucci loafers and, just it was kind of a different look that he brought, much more professional look that he brought to, and it wasn't just a look. It was a kind of a philosophy and a operating philosophy and a conceptual philosophy that he he kind of raised he's the one who set the bar. He's raised the bar, and he's raised it on many different occasions. Here he's won 17 500s or something, but it was also, he was the guy to beat. When I was driving, if you beat Roger's team on that given day, you really felt like you'd done something, and of course the satisfaction that you got from competing successfully against Roger was tremendous. You really, like I said, as a driver or as a team owner, you feel like you've really done something because Roger is the guy. He's the goalpost. And so in any event, I have tremendous respect for Roger. He's the guy who also, in people remark about how I took my racing career and parlayed that into a successful business career. But Roger predated me, by decades. So all I did was kind of follow the example that he led, and so I've had a great, I think, opportunity to see Roger work not only at the racetracks but in the boardrooms and in the day-to-day business of selling automobiles that we both do pretty well at. And so it's
there's a blueprint there.
Absolutely. He's the guy, and nobody really was doing that before him. So, but since him, a lot of others have.
From a driving standpoint, Bob, when you're coming up through the ranks in the 70s in particular, Roger had already been into the team ownership side for a while, but you, especially with your father and his racing history, I have to imagine your first understanding of Roger was as a driver and as a successful one. Did that shape any thoughts on your end as well in your young career of, here's someone who I've seen can be Class A person in multiple disciplines?
Well, I have to say, when I watch as a spectator, as a fan, as I still am, but particularly in those days, the idea of driving a race car seemed so far-fetched that, it was unreal, for me. Obviously, when I got the chance to start driving, thanks to my father, then all of a sudden, now you start and having some success in the junior categories. It felt like, okay, this is something that you can make a livelihood out of. You can build a career, and so Roger definitely was really the first example of that, I think, that I saw, where you could both on and off the racetrack. And I got to tell you, I remember listening on the radio in '72 when Donahue won here with Roger, and I was so chuffed, so pleased about that, because here was a guy who was mainly a road racer, coming here, and showing all the roundy-rounders, how to go do it. And in those days, he was up against some great teams, Parnelli Jones team, Bell's Parnelli Jones, and many others. So, Roger, he broke a lot of barriers as he expanded his role in sport, and it was great to watch.
You mentioned something before we started recording that it's news to me. I thought I had a pretty good memory of all the interesting points of your career, Bob. There was a time where you could have been a Roger Penske driver?
Sure. Yeah, well, it was interesting, and I think it probably was around 1981, 80, when IndyCar was doing more and more road racing. I actually sent a letter to Roger. I think I still have it, the response, but it was basically, I sent a letter to Roger saying, hey, I'd like you to consider me, to drive, on some of the road courses or the road course section, if possible, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, I got a nice letter back that basically said, don't call us, we'll call you. And then, but it didn't quite say that, but that was the
feeling.
Point. That was the point. And anyway, in 84, in 1984, on the Las Vegas weekend, I'm sitting outside. The cars were in a auditorium of sorts, and Dan Luganbuehl came up to me, and of course I'd gotten to know Dan, and Dan was Roger's right-hand guy. He was the guy, his title was PR guy, but he was a lot more than that.
Sure.
And anyway, Dan comes up to me. He says, "Would you come with me? And Roger would like to speak to you." So I went into this auditorium, and we're kind of hidden off behind the corner, and there's Roger, and he said, "We'd like you to drive for us in 1985." And of course, I was obviously flattered, and I think I then had to go out and go drive practice or something, so I couldn't give him an answer right there and then. But I was really tormented because the guy who'd brought me to the dance was Jim Truman.
Yeah,
and this is before Jim was sick, and I had a lot of loyalty to Jim for doing what he did for me, and so in the end I went back and expressed my appreciation, but again my loyalty to Jim kind of won out, and of course, then the next year, Danny wins the 500. I go, God, luckily 1 year later I did. But you sit there and you think, geez, that could have been me.
Wow.
But anyway, that's a true story.
So moving about a decade later, there's this really fascinating connection between you and Roger in that your team, you taking over now, moving into team ownership, trying to make a legacy made in America chassis successful here at the 500, trying to do a lot of new things here at the 500 were not working out for you.
Right.
Then coming back not too long after, the unthinkable happens. The great team Penske finds themselves in a position. I have some wonderful photos of you in your iconic helmet in a red and white Chevron Marlboro car with the Marlboro livery taken off, but you clearly...
And Miller on
right?
genuine draft on the side of it, yeah.
You in a Penske backup car, whatever it was, photos of, I think, Emerson in one of your backup... Tell us about this unique intersection between you and RP, actually trying to hold each other down in the hardest of times.
Well, in the end, Roger's a sportsman, and the great thing about racing has always been that, if a fellow competitor needs help, you try to, if you can, you'll try to help them, and that was the case for us in '94 when it was clear that we weren't going to qualify. And remember, we had not qualified in '93, so I couldn't, the idea of not qualifying again in '94 wasn't going to. That was going to be a hard pill for our sponsors or anybody else to swallow, let alone ourselves. So, and also it was because of Carl Hogan had a relationship with Roger as well, and really it was from that Carl, we were able to lease the cars from the previous year, the Penskes, and it was a very good car. I remember getting in the car to do my first laps in it, and I facetiously said, well, hell, if I'd had one of these, I could have won 400 or 500s by now. But it was a very good car, and we ended up third in the race. It was great that we were able to get that help from Roger, because had we not gotten that help, I think it was pretty obvious, pretty clear that the odds of us not making the race were pretty good. But then the next year, of course, Roger's having problems with his cars, getting them up to speed, and it just shows the competitiveness of this event. And sure enough, we were in the position to help him, and tried to help him as best we could. And unfortunately, that still wasn't good enough. They couldn't get it going there in the time they had. So I think the idea of Roger Penske, given all his success here, not qualifying for the Indy 500. I don't think anybody ever could have conceived of that. And as I said earlier, this just says nothing more than what this race is all about, that there's no gimmies, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what you've done, it's all about now. And Roger, our not qualifying, I think, showed that. And then, of course, Roger really, that really made that point clear. So it was, but as I say, Roger's a first-class guy, and in everything he does, and there's no secret, there's no reason, there's no mystery to the success that he's had, and it's about the leadership that he really, he really conveys to not just his people, but to the sport. Remember also, in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, Roger and Pat Patrick kept IndyCar racing alive, when they started karts and everything else. So, he's made a huge investment in the sport of IndyCar racing over the years.
Obviously, we wouldn't talk numbers or anything private, but can you share some insights, Bob, of whether it's you getting into backup Penske cars, Roger wanting to use some to try and get in the show in '95 with yours? What was it like dealing with Roger just from a business standpoint? Because there's some business there as well, but I'm curious, was this just something more, I don't want to say among friends, but I can't imagine this would have been, all right, let's flip to page 67 of the contract. Right? I would imagine it would be more two peers trying to help one another.
Absolutely.
And not making the business a central core. Was that true?
I think very much so. And remember, the two cars that we got, one had been made into a show car, and the other one, and we had to turn it pretty much overnight into a race car, and that couldn't have been done without Roger's people. And I think it was very clear that Roger said to his people, and I have no doubt that a couple of them could have been moaning about it, but I don't think there was no doubt that Roger said, listen, you got to help Carl and Bobby, we got to get this done, and so whether there was some business to it or not was kind of irrelevant, because in the end it was his it was his spirit that really drove the decision and his friendship that both Carl and I had and have with him, that is what motivated the car swap in both years.
Let's close on this, Bob. So your son Graham has followed suit in establishing businesses as well while driving, which is great. So he's getting an early start on that.
Yeah.
What do you look at in terms of RP, coming back to the central point of this 50 years at the Speedway, all the trends that he has set, the ways that he conducts himself? What are the things, whether it's passing on directly to Graham or hoping that he might pick up from RP, where you go, boy, these are some genuinely good things for you to consider?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Graham sees Roger. He may not have the years of experience that I have with Roger, but he's seen him certainly as he's been a competitor, and he, I think, fully understands, respects, admires Roger for what he's done. I'm sure, like any driver, Graham would love to have driven for Roger, and who knows, maybe one day. But in the end, again, competing head to head against Roger's guys, that's a big thing for any driver, and I think that and it's interesting because Roger knows that Graham has invested in dealerships, taken his money and investing it, and he's been Roger has spent time with Graham on it, and that's just Roger being Roger. Nobody's asked him to do that; he just did it. And talking about the car business, or talking about this, or investing his money, and so I think Roger respects Graham for having started following in my footsteps and maybe his footsteps, and he likes to see that a young guy achieving success at some level can now invest so that he can have further success the day he walks away from that race car.
Since 1954, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway has served as the proving grounds for the world's most legendary helmet brand. From Jimmy Bryan to Mario Andretti and Helio Castroneves, Bell Helmets has and continues to protect some of the all-time greats. Follow the journey on social media at Bell Racing HQ or by visiting bellracing.com. What have you seen the ways that Roger has maybe changed the culture, competitive mindset, you name it, at the Indy 500?
Well, let me start with Roger as my hero, and I think a lot of people would say that. I can say a lot of great things about Roger. First and foremost, it's a pleasure to know him. I think when you look at Roger, he's done an unbelievable job of having his business benefit from his motor racing efforts, and his motor racing efforts benefit from his business. I mean, he really uses both as a kind of a case study on how motor racing can work for your business. I think he employs great talent and delegates, but holds people very accountable. He's a class act individual, but very tough. Funny little story. He came to see me at McLaren not all that long ago, and I saw him driving in the passenger seat with his driver, coming down the lake, and he was in the front seat. And you just wouldn't see anyone, and that he's very respectful of everyone, regardless of kind of rank, I guess is what I'm saying there. So I think he's a quality individual. He knows how to win. He's obviously very sharp, when he brought out the Mercedes and, to pull that type of program off at Indianapolis, where it was double, triple top secret. Only Roger could do something like that. That was pretty darn impressive. And I think, as we spoke earlier about people wanting to, work at McLaren, I think the same can very much be said about Roger Penske and Penske's organization. And he's raced in multiple forms of racing and, used to race himself. So if I kind of look at my career, which isn't a fraction of success that Roger's had, but I do see similarities that he started off as a racer and then a business guy, and then he's in multiple different forms of racing. So he's someone I've looked up to for that reason.
Mr. Hull, you have always been gracious in sharing praise for Team Penske from the position of respecting your competition. You've always been someone who has said of Roger and their outfit knowing that Chip Ganassi Racing Team and Penske are usually neck and neck each year for wins and championships, you've always been very forthright in saying, when we win, when we beat them, that only amplifies our sense of accomplishment. So knowing that, looking at how this year is the 50th anniversary of Team Penske at Indianapolis, curious to get your thoughts on how you have seen Team Penske change, culture, set levels and bars, something at the 500, even when you were observing early in your career.
Well, first of all, I think that Mr. Penske approached his very first 500, now 50 years ago, the same way he's going to approach this one. He sets the standard for his people with his ethic. And I think that's always defined the culture. There's probably not too many people left at Penske Racing except for Roger that have been there 50 years.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, the consistency of motion, the consistency of action by him has set the standard not only for his people, but for the rest of us to follow. I don't know if I should use the word, he's the gold standard for the Indy 500. And in our lifetime, in my racing lifetime, with Chip Ganassi, I think Chip will probably get there if he has the 40 years or the 20 years head start that Roger does have. And there's others. Michael's team is trying to do it too, and they're doing a great job of it. So there's others that have followed in the wake of what Penske Racing does at Indy. For open wheel people in the United States, for sure, that is the race that sets you apart. And it certainly set him apart in the eyes of all of us.
Knowing the examples that Penske has set, I guess we could say it's like anything in racing, maybe even life, where if you see a standard, a new standard, and could be, pick the area, vehicle preparation, team apparel, public relations, anytime a new standard is set, if the other teams are listening, and the good ones are, they're noticing. There's some might see it, might not take it to heart and try to adapt and reach that new level, but it's a constant one-upsmanship that's going on. Your team, for example, has reached that level, one where with all the championships, in particular this decade, Indy 500 wins and so on, can say that there has been parity, if not stepping above Team Penske at points as well. Where does that register with you, knowing that I know you always want to be respectful and pay homage to those who've inspired to set standards for a Chip Ganassi Racing, but there's also times where you've been able to exceed. How do you balance that achievement versus respect?
Yes, I think that if people like me at Chip Ganassi Racing stopped to really think about that, we'd be paralyzed. And so what we work really hard on, and we say it all the time, and it's very factual, we work on today. And Penske Racing and some of our counterparts also do exactly the same. They work on today's projects extremely well. I think what sets him apart, what sets Roger apart, is his ability to forecast what he needs, what his team needs. I think our owner, Chip Ganassi, does exactly the same thing. So they're very similar in that regard. They're always thinking about what the team needs, and that's what's really great. So people like me, we work on today. People like Roger and Chip work on what we need next. And I think that that's what you need to have, because that's what creates the consistency of motion that you need to have an organization that's flexible enough to react to change quicker than everybody else. In today's, I don't think today's age of racing is any different than it was when he started 50 years ago. It's a basic thing. You have to remember what your core business model is. We race cars. It's that simple. Yes, the formulas changed. Yes, the engines have changed. Yes, the tires have changed. But we still race cars. And we're lucky enough to do that. People pay us to race on Sunday. And so you should never vary or fall away or remove yourself from the mindset that is your core business model. And that's what he's also done a really good job of. And he's been very flexible in his action to make sure that he has the right people in the right places at the right time. And that starts with the drivers and works its way through the entire system. And I believe that quality race teams like Chip Ganassi Racing do the same.
If we think about reputation of a Team Penske within the paddock, I think there are some stereotypes, right? Penske perfect, machine-like people, just no emotion, 100%. They're effectively robots. What have you seen in getting to know, whether it's Roger, a Tim Cindric, mechanics, drivers, and such? What have you seen within that team that tells you otherwise?
I think that you can go to Barnes and Noble and you can buy books on how to manage people, and there's more than one way to do it. They manage their people with a certain style and a certain flair. We manage our people to a strict standard, but probably with a bit different, more of a blue-collar look, maybe from the outside, than what they do. It's proven in racing that over time, both of those systems can work. So I think what you do as you build your culture is you don't really think too much about that. You think more about the people and having the right people in place and how to define accountability for you and your team rather than concentrate on how somebody does on the other side, because we don't know. The only time we ever find out about Penske Racing is if somebody drifts away over there and we hire them. We might find something out that we didn't realize, but it doesn't happen very often.
That's a great point. One would think among these, your two, Andretti being part of the big three that we've mentioned for, well more than a decade, but at least between Ganassi and Penske, Briscoe comes to mind as someone who, Ryan Briscoe is a driver, but to your point, you might think that between Coke and Pepsi, there'd be lots of trying to hire and find out secrets and such. In reality, that hasn't really been a part of the culture.
Not really, and I think that we have a lot of respect for Penske and Andretti, and we don't poach people from those teams. If one of their people walk in the door, we'll talk to them, but it doesn't happen regularly. But if you step back maybe just a little bit and you look back in and you look at Michael Andretti, look at Chip Ganassi, and look at Roger Penske when they were race drivers, you almost see the same thing in the management of their teams. And because they still have their own way of doing business, they have their own personality, and their personalities come through in the management of their teams in a very similar manner to how they drove race cars. Certainly the generation, or a lot of the generation that will hear this broadcast, don't remember when Roger drove race cars. They don't remember why he stopped racing cars. And I was really young when he was racing, but I've looked at a lot of the videos, and there was a great RRDC event a few years ago in Long Beach where people talked about him, and the classic story for him shows that he isn't that person that you referenced. He isn't that buttoned-up guy. When he drove that car into the swimming pool, that shows you that he has a lot of flair. And he wasn't afraid to talk about that story. A lot of people would think that might tarnish his image, but I think that it's exactly the opposite. He's a real person, and he cares about people, and he cares about racing, and he cares about us. He's not so into Penske racing that he forgets about who we are. And he cares about the sport. And he cares about the generation coming along that's going to support the sport moving forward. He cares about the process of the sport. He's in different series, but he reacts and operates exactly the same way in NASCAR, in IMSA, in the series in Australia. that he does in the United States in IndyCar racing. And that consistency wins races and championships.
The last bit that you mentioned, Mike, I think could be another interesting area of distinction or appreciation possibly. So when Chip Ganassi Racing was formed, there was a somewhat brief foray outside the IndyCar team. There was an Indy Lights effort that was, again, very brief and done with help with some others. But by and large, Chip Ganassi Racing was an IndyCar team. Additional layers and branches were added with NASCAR and sports cars and such. Has there been anything from looking at that Penske model that you think might have served, not inspiration, but at least we see how someone like Roger can focus on a core, but then build some other pillars that aren't lesser, they're equal, but we've now really massively expanded who we are in our footprint. Are there any parallels there, you think?
I think there are. And I think Michael's team is experiencing a positive there. We certainly do, because racing is about people. It's how you either manage or don't manage them that makes a big difference. Yeah. But it's about the talent that walks through the door every morning. So when you have different vocations that race in different series, you find the best. You know, racing is survival of the fittest. And if we have somebody that walks in the door and works on our sports car, and we find out how special that person actually is, we didn't know. We looked at the resume, but how do we know? Or how that person fits in our culture, which is probably more important. That person could be on a sports car today, and in a year or two, that person could be on an Indy car, or vice versa. We have a lot of inter-team promotion where we have somebody who's ready to be in a management position, or somebody that's ready to be a crew chief, or somebody that's ready to move to the back of a car from the front. We might move them to the back of the car in a sports car from an Indy car. We might, the two people that are presently our crew chiefs in IMSA were rear-end mechanics, both on winning teams, one with Dario, one with Scott Dixon, and they're doing a great job on our IMSA team. So I think that part of the expansion is what you have. People don't go both ways or three ways or whatever all the time for us, but they go one way, and that's hopefully to the top of the organization.
Let's close on this, Mike. So looking at how Penske is indeed celebrating their 50th, knowing that at Indianapolis, that is a place where Chip Ganassi Racing is obviously wanting to get back into the win column. Among all the goals and desires and initiatives in motion by your team to do that, where does a Team Penske and a Roger fit in as either an obstacle, I mean a positive one again, but you don't wake up every morning thinking, how do we beat Roger? I know that you think about how can we be the best who we are, but ultimately when we do go to Indianapolis, there's always a question as to how big of an influence Penske will be on that event. Curious where this fits in as we're coming into their 50th anniversary of, what's it still going to be a big mountain to climb to get past them?
The one thing I'm probably not going to think too much about this year at Indianapolis is the fact that it'll be 50 years for Roger. I'm going to think about what we need, as you referenced, what we need to do to finish first. I think Indianapolis is the only race that's an exception to with Chip in our race meeting. Chip always says in the race meeting, if you can't finish first, finish second. If you can't finish second, finish third. If you can't finish third, finish fourth. That's not the Indy 500. If you finish second at the Indy 500, you feel miserable for days. And I think it's because of the amount of time that you expend plus the gravity of the race itself. So certainly, I don't know if anyone in motor racing will ever approach his record, Roger Penske's record. We'd certainly like to be someone that pushes the envelope there, along with some of our other competitors. Certainly wish him the best. And I'm glad, really, that I've gotten to know him. I'm glad that I've gotten to race against him. You know, they say two things about races that happen. You either are in the same race or you race against the best. And we've raced against the best for a long, long time. And that for us is a measure of who we've become. And he was certainly part of driving force in that regard for us. I'm a little disappointed in a way. I would say this publicly. I'm a little disappointed in a way that I never accepted his offer to go to work for him. But at the same time, I've made the most out of it with an owner of equal stature, in my opinion. And I'm really glad that I have, and I'm glad that I've had the opportunity to race against Roger, because that really is something you never thought you'd be able to do, and we have achieved that. So you just have to keep working at it.
And that was how Roger Penske changed the Indy 500. You can catch this series and more than 500 episodes at the brand new MarshallPruittPodcast.com site. All brought to you by Cooper Tires, the Justice Brothers, and Bell Racing Helmets.